Okay, fabulous. So, good morning, everybody. Officially, we'll keep admitting folks, but great to have you all with us today. My name is Sharon Goodson, if we haven't met before, and welcome to one of our webinars. We have these a couple times a month, and they are on a range of topics. We work with Dr. Bronner's and their grants team, Elisa Hauser and Christina Munoz. Oh, and Elisa's here. Yay. Oh, I didn't see you pop on there. Great.
Just got here.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So yes, so we have been partnering on these workshops like officially this year, and then we started to dabble in it the year before because we were both doing the same kind of stuff, and we thought, well, let's put our heads together and be able to provide more offerings to grantees and nonprofits in general. So it's been a great partnership, and we really value that a lot. It's at least from the Leech Tag Foundation Impact Cubed, and it's saved us a lot of time, energy, and even some funding. So we are very much appreciate it. Elisa, thank you for being here. I haven't seen you for a little bit. So this workshop came out of some research that we did. We did a big survey last year of all of the Dr. Bronner's grantees and everyone in our network with some different options for trainings. And really, that's how we came up with the list this year. If not that, then it comes out of some of the conversations that we have for Fundraising Fridays, which a number of you have joined us for those. If you haven't, that's just a meeting that we have Friday mornings from 9 to 10, which is an informal time to ask questions and get advice and anything fundraising. So if that's of interest and you're not involved, let me know, and I'm happy to add you to our list. Love more the merrier. So as you see, I am recording the workshop, and we will share out the link. We'll upload it to YouTube and then share out the link this afternoon, along with the PowerPoint that Michael is going to use. We'll keep an eye on the chat, but I think that is it for my logistics. Now I'm going to introduce a very dear friend and colleague, Michael Rapkin, who I think many of you may even know. He's wonderful. I mean, what can you say? He has been he was longtime executive director / CEO of Hillel of San Diego, which is our Jewish students on campus. And that was for all of the campuses in San Diego. So San Diego State, UCSD, San Marcos, etc. And the last, I don't know, probably 8 or so years, has been having a broader leadership goal within Hillel and supervising many of the campuses, I want to say throughout the West Coast, but is it bigger than that? Yeah, anyway. Yeah, bigger. It's a lot of campuses. I'll let him tell you about that also as well. But anyway, he has fabulous leadership background and a lot of experience with organizational development and governance. So he's the perfect person to do that. I will turn it over to you, Michael. If you want to share more about yourself, you can do that as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sharon, and thanks to Impact Cubed and Dr. Bronner's for this opportunity to give this presentation and share some of the things I've learned over the past 25 years in nonprofit leadership. I'm going to share my screen, and you can see, Sharon, just let me know if you can see it clearly. Yeah, okay, great. And I want to just rearrange my windows so that I can see folks on this side here. So yeah, Sharon was saying I've been working in nonprofit for 25 years, and currently I work with Hillel International, which is the world's largest organization serving Jewish college students. And what I do is effectively I serve as an internal strategy and management consultant for a number of independent 501c3 affiliates on the West Coast. And so I support them with all kinds of mentorship and guidance on all areas of nonprofit management. It could be operations, program design, fundraising, board development, you name it. So I was the executive director for Hillel of San Diego for 5 years. Before that, the director at Emory Hillel. And I earned my master's in public administration from NYU's Wagner School of Public Service. And board development is an area that I find to be extremely fascinating. And clearly all of you are here because you are also interested in the topic. So we're going to be talking about the meetings specifically and how do we make them more engaging, more productive, and more generative. Because with better meetings actually comes better boards. So whoever came up with that title, great job. So I want to get started, and I don't want to be completely frontal with this presentation. I really want to invite some interactive participation. For those who are willing, you can use the chat. Feel free to unmute if you have questions, if you have comments, okay? It's a relatively large group. That's okay. We can manage it. So I wanted to just sort of break the ice a little bit. And I want to hear about some of the biggest complaints that you've heard about board meetings. By the way, any fans of the show Silicon Valley? That's what this is from. So what are some of the complaints you've heard? Boring, yeah. Run too long, okay. People don't adhere to timeframes, yep. What are some others that come to mind? People aren't engaged enough, okay, yeah. Nothing consequential. Not enough context, no substance, lack of fun. Yeah, you're hitting on all the, yeah, totally. Too much focus on financials, okay, yep. All right, I want to shift gears. What are some compliments you've heard about board meetings? Hopefully this isn't too hard of a question. Good time to connect. Yep. Driving initiatives forward. Yep. People keeping to timelines. People respect that. There's actual alignment. I guess, yeah, mission alignment. Yep. Opportunity to connect with others who share the passion for the mission. That's really important. Yep. Interesting content. Yep. Appreciating transparency and connection, appreciating being part of the work. Friendly, cordial, supportive of staff. That's a good one. Yep. Meeting new people, good structure. Yep. Oh, these are great comments. Okay, so we're really getting the gears turning here. This is exactly what I want us to be thinking about. The board meeting is an important venue for so many things that happen, as people have already pointed out. So I want to talk a little bit about what are some of the negative consequences of subpar board meetings. So the first thing that really comes to mind for me is reputation and recruitment, right? So one measure of success of your organization and of your board is that the best possible candidates all say yes when invited to serve on the board. I mean, how many times have you asked somebody to serve on your board and you can't get them to yes, right? So what would be great is if the reputation is so good that people are raising their hands and asking to serve before you even have to go to them. And I actually had that happen recently with the board that I work with. And it was a really exciting and telling moment. So you want your board meetings, your board members to go home.
A webinar.
Oh, whoops, Jess, I think we're hearing your audio. There we go. Thanks. Thank you. So you want your board members to go home from meetings and tell their family, friends, and neighbors how great it is to serve on your board. And that means making sure they have an exceptionally positive experience, expertly curated by the board chair in partnership with the CEO and executive director every single time. So other consequences, people just not showing up, really poor oversight, poor governance. Somebody commented in the chat just now, lackluster board staff relationships, unclear organizational direction, missed opportunities, for innovative thinking. All of these are negative consequences that we want to avoid, that we can avoid if we get the meetings just right. So why is it that meetings, frankly, most of them, are a waste of time? So there's a great study that was published in the Harvard Business Review in 2004 by strategy consultant Michael Mankins and his team. And what they found, they looked at companies, they found that companies routinely squander their most precious resource, the time of their top leaders. And in the case of nonprofits, of course, it could be the executive leadership, but also the board. They found that time is poorly spent in diffuse discussions, never even meant to result in any decision. And turns out there are real impacts on the organization's bottom line. So let's take a look at the agenda, for example. How easy is it for a minor issue to emerge that derails the majority of a meeting with very little to show for the time spent on it? How do issues even make it onto the agenda? So an unfocused, undisciplined agenda, that's a real significant source of wasted time. Who's been to a board meeting where a brief update on the annual gala turned into a 30-minute discussion on the venue's decor or party favors, right? So that's a sign that not enough attention is being paid to strategy. All right. So think of a typical board meeting agenda. Variety of committee reports followed by good and welfare. This has happened to me more than once, where a committee chair sends an email apologizing he can't make the meeting, so he asked for his report to be read for him. What's to stop everybody from doing that? So that's 90 minutes that literally could have been an email. So meetings aren't structured to produce real decisions. So it's time for a board meeting reset. Maybe you're looking at what's going on in your board meetings, and you want to start to think about doing something different. So let's start with the question, why have board meetings? What's the point of them? So I want to tell a brief story first. One of the organizations that I've worked with has an executive committee. And it used to be the executive committee of the board would meet monthly, exactly 1 week before each board meeting. And at the executive committee, that group made all of the decisions on the agenda that was then put before the board meeting the following week. The board then went through a process of effectively rubber stamping all the decisions the executive committee had made. As you can imagine, over time, people got tired of sitting on this board because they knew that all of the power was in the executive committee and their time was not being valued. So one of the leaders noticed this and said it's time to change the bylaws. And she led a revision process that effectively disempowered the executive committee so that the full board, every director, could fully share in the collective ownership of all decisions. And it was a sea change. It made a huge impact. And I think that's an important reminder for all of us that collectively the board is the owner of the nonprofit, not the CEO, not the executive director, not the staff. And it's official meetings where decisions are getting made and effective decision making requires effective board meetings. This is one of the key things that we have to recognize about why we have board meetings. This is where key decisions are being made that shape the organization's future. It's also really important that there's oversight to ensure the organization is well managed and mission focused. And this is an opportunity for the board to engage in generative thinking to address complex challenges. Now, generative discussions, if you're not familiar with the term, it's a conversation that encourages people to think creatively and collaboratively, to explore ideas, to solve problems. It's really one step beyond strategic level discussions that are focused on action and decision making. So a generative discussion is one where your group will see the world differently, so you can make sense of a situation, discover patterns, you can identify problems that are at the heart of what's important to all of the stakeholders of the organization. Now, boards cannot live in generative mode, or you'll never get anything done. But it's really important to get there once in a while so you can zoom out and really see the big picture collectively. So why have board meetings? That's an important starting point. There is a board that I consulted with that had a rigid formula for their board meetings in place for years and years and years. It went like this: welcome, pass the minutes from the last meeting, a litany of committee reports, the executive director report, good and welfare. Now, as you might expect, the only part of that meeting when anybody seemed to be engaged or animated was the good and welfare part, the very end. So there were a few people who really wanted to shake things up, but then we started to hear that dreaded objection. That's the way we've always done it. True, that is something you have to address. You know, it takes a leader to really notice that the formula isn't working, be willing to make some adjustments, engage the change makers, right? They may have an inkling that there's a problem, but they need you to motivate them to make that change. So it takes a bold leader to bring the naysayers along for the ride. Or as one of my mentors would say, we're going somewhere new. It's time to get on the plane, leave your baggage on the tarmac. So let's dig in. Let's be change makers. We got to get ready though. So quick show of hands for those of you on the camera. You looked at your bylaws in the past year? Couple years? All right. It's not something that we typically do. Good. Yes, really important to do. But when you're ready, good, thank you. When you're ready to start thinking about the kinds of changes that you want to make for your board, it's important to really understand what the starting point is. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I just want to point out that there may be some important rules of engagement for how your board meetings ought to be structured that are in your bylaws. So figure out that baseline. And you might also start to see areas for enhancing your board meeting experience with some real simple changes to the bylaws. You know, like how many people make up a quorum, how early do you have to give notice, how frequently do meetings have to happen, and so on. So let me dive into some of the essentials that we're going to talk about. First is we want to focus on strategy, not operations. So remember that story about spending half an hour on the decor at the annual gala during the board meeting? That's an operational question. The strategy question is who's running the event, who's empowered, what's their budget, what are the goals, right? That's what the board meeting discussion should be. And are we authorizing that the budget include an annual gala this year? Next, we're going to be focusing on decisions, not discussions, right? We don't want to get into analysis paralysis for anything. So when you're thinking about structuring your board meeting, it's thinking about how do we make sure we're doing this for the sake of making decisions not just to have a discussion about it. And while we're talking about making decisions, make sure they're consequential, make sure they're meaningful. So we talked earlier about people complaining about board meetings that it was boring, it wasn't really high stakes. Make the board meetings engaging and enticing by making the decisions really high stakes. Yeah, Jess, you're okay. You're muted. We're good. Anyway, so the other piece of this is when you're thinking about how you're making decisions, there's a process to it. So what does that look like? It could be as simple as making sure you're using Robert's Rules of Order. It could be that you have a time limit, but think about the process so that you have a really consistent way of making those consequential choices and decisions. And as somebody mentioned in the chat earlier, it's really important for board members to feel well prepared in advance. So giving them the information, the context, the questions to think about before they go into the meeting. And then we're going to talk a little bit about this in a bit, but agenda items have to be moving along so people feel like there's momentum to the meeting. So before I move on, I want to see if there are any questions on these essentials. And you feel free to unmute if you'd like. Questions or comments, things that you've observed. How much do these guidelines apply to committee meetings? That's a great question, Carrie. So you can use these basic essentials for any meeting, whether it's a board meeting, a committee meeting, or a staff meeting. So it's a little secret that I think you'll find to be very helpful. Some of the pieces that we're talking about here are just relative to governance-based decisions. But yeah, they certainly can. Any other questions or comments on this? Thanks for that, Carrie. All right, so let's take a look at this. So this is an approach to board meeting planning that has helped me and helped a lot of people create the right context, the right sense of feeling, the right sense of engagement that will make the experience meaningful and memorable. A board meeting is just a dinner party, right? We don't have a meeting just to meet. You got to make sure that it's purposeful with an agenda that has real stakes. At least one really important decision needs to get made. So when setting the agenda, think of it like a dinner party. So just like you need a gracious host who keeps the meal and the conversation moving along, your board meetings need to be facilitated by a strong and capable leader who understands how to serve a meal. So cocktails, I'm not talking about actually serving drinks. I'm just talking about the pre-meeting socializing. This was the one of the comments somebody made earlier about how important it is for the board meetings to be a social experience where you get to meet new people. Build that into the board meeting, right? Give directors some time to mingle and socialize. It helps build trust. It helps build rapport so that when they're actually in the process of making decisions, they're doing it with somebody that they actually know and trust. Appetizers. This is the part of the meeting where you set an intention, restate the mission, pass the consent agenda, which I'm gonna talk about next. These are just some morsels to get the meeting flowing, right? You get some real easy stuff off the bat just to kind of cleanse the palate. Then you get into the meat and potatoes of the meeting. Talking one up to maybe 3 key decisions that require hearty discussion, right? 3 might be too many unless your board is really capable of efficient decision-making processes. But if you're trying this out for the first time, just aim for one really big decision, and then move up from there. And then last but not least is dessert. And this is where you want to have somebody tell an uplifting story that reinforces the sense of purpose. Why are they serving on this board? Connect back to what's meaningful about the mission, right? You want everybody to walk away with a smile on their face or strong resolve to follow through on some key action items. So, what do you notice about this structure? What are some thoughts? What comes to mind for you? And how are you reacting? How does it feel? What do you like about it? Yep, gives a real nice structure to the agenda. Thanks, Sharon. Lisa loves the structure. Okay, nice. Keeps focus. Yeah, yeah, they know what to expect. Sure. Tells a story, builds a story. Yeah. Ooh, that's cool. I like that. You like the meal metaphor. Yeah. If anybody has read The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker, this is I think an essential book to read because it helps do exactly what I've done here, which is you enter into every kind of gathering with a sense of purpose. And the meal metaphor really helps. Um, so just a few more thoughts on the agenda. As you're thinking about building your agenda with this kind of a framework, just make sure that you've got a time limit for each agenda item. Make that explicit on the printed agenda so that people know what to expect. I think that's a really big part of it. Somebody mentioned it in the comments, and thanks, Christina, for linking to that. Um, Describe each agenda item clearly in the printed materials. Now, I'm not saying you should use headers like cocktails, appetizers, main course, and dessert. You'll use your own language, but whatever it is, make sure it's really clear and don't be vague. And you can also, by the way, on your agenda, you can list some key dates for upcoming meetings and events. So it sort of gets people primed for how this meeting fits into the next stage, the next big thing, the bigger picture. All right, moving on from that. So here's another little piece I like to think about, that meetings are actually 3 weeks long. What do I mean by that? So first of all, let me just mention a few common mistakes that I see made. Board meetings being scheduled haphazardly rather than regularly. I can just picture a story I heard recently where an executive director said, yeah, my board chair decided we need a board meeting, so we put one on the calendar for next week. Okay. But there's no regular schedule for the rest of the year. No, that's a problem too. Board members really need to have all the events, board meetings scheduled throughout the year. So another mistake I see, the date of the board meeting, it creeps up suddenly. And then the executive director pulls the agenda together the night before. Or board meetings don't have the meeting on their calendars. They get an invitation less than a week before, but they can't make it. And then the bylaws require a certain number of days of notice for meetings, but nobody's read the bylaws in 10 years, so we don't know what that is. So like I said, make sure that the board members have the entire year's worth of board meetings in their calendar, apart from special meetings, but before the first meeting of the fiscal year. And then for each meeting, 3 weeks out is when you start thinking about what's happening. You send out your first reminder with an RSVP, and that gets people primed for the expectation that they're going to be on call for this experience. All right, 2 weeks out. This is where the agenda should be close to final so that staff and committee members have time to prepare relevant materials to send out. Nothing should be sent out the day before the meeting. Here's an opportunity to use the executive committee, if you have one, as a sounding board to determine which issues are ready to be presented to the board for decisions, what should go to committees to deliberate and eventually make recommendations to the board, what should be left to management to make decisions on, and then lastly, what needs to be included in written reports for the consent agenda, which I'm gonna talk about in a bit. 1 week out. This is where you send an email. And you might have a board portal where people can log in to get all their materials, which is also great. I know those can be very useful. They can also be very expensive. But if you're sending an email out, do it no later than 7 days before the meeting. All of the materials you can bundle up in one PDF. And then in the body of the email, I like to give a preview of the key decisions that need to get made. So directors can start to get the gears turning. They can read all the materials with a sense of curiosity and purpose. And you can add some emotion and excitement to it. Like, for example, this is a monumental decision that will shape the direction of our organization for the next 5 years, right? And this way, your board members won't only be prepared, they just won't want to miss it. So one day before, you send one last reminder, and that's it, right? So yeah, meetings are 3 weeks long. So let's talk about the consent agenda. If you want to raise your hands, have you used a consent agenda before? Great, yeah. So this was actually new to me about 10 years ago. I hadn't heard of it. And somebody said to me, this is a good way to save time. I said, well, what is it? How does it work? So it's a bundle of materials that includes things like your staff and committee reports, program updates, the meeting minutes from the last meeting, maybe your latest fundraising and financial statements, any routine policy updates or just basic standard compliance issues, gift acceptance approvals if you're a grant-making organization and there are some grants that need to be authorized that don't require discussion, you can build those in here. And so what's interesting, first of all, let me just mention, if there is a financial or fundraising problem that needs a major decision of the board, then you wouldn't put that into the consent agenda. You'd want to put that as an agenda item in the meeting. But here what happens is any director can pull out any item from the consent agenda for discussion by the board. Otherwise, the entire consent agenda can be passed in one single motion, which saves a tremendous amount of time, right? You don't need lengthy discussions about the minutes from the last meeting. As long as people have it in advance and have read it, you can expect that they've read it, you're good to go. So this is another pointer I learned not too long ago, which is the idea of having a time set aside for, yes, you're going to get the presentation. I'm going to package it up in a PDF and send it into an email to share and to distribute. So yeah, setting aside time for executive session at the end of each meeting is a really good idea. It can be as little as 5 minutes. It could be 10 minutes, depends on what works for you. What does that do? There might be a sensitive issue that needs discussion without guests or staff present. The board has to be able to have time to be with itself and discuss matters. And what's interesting is having it on there regularly means that you're not going to raise alarms by adding it only when you need it, right? So if there's a problem that needs to get addressed in executive session and you add that to the agenda, it might make staff anxious when they see the agenda. All right. Questions about any of those things before I move on to the next piece? Particularly executive session. Nothing. Okay. I'm going to move on. So here's where I like to continue with the meal metaphor. And how do we set the table with intention? So what does the room look like? What is on the table, literally? So obviously you're going to want to put your printed agendas and other materials and set them out at every seat. It's nice maybe to have notepads and pens. I like putting out name placards so that, again, for the socialization piece, make sure everybody's seeing each other's names, right? And they're printed big and legibly. And what I like to do on the flip side of that name placard is actually print the mission statement of the organization so that when they're in discussion during the board meeting and they're looking out over the top of their name placard at other people around the room, the thing that's at the bottom of their view is the mission statement, right? It keeps them mission focused, literally. Snacks and beverages, it's always nice to have available. Look, in this day and age, now that we've been through, COVID and everything has been on Zoom, we should have the right equipment for people who are participating remotely. I remember struggling mightily years and years ago before it was commonplace to do Zoom meetings. Setting up the right kind of a screen, making sure we had the right kind of microphones, where did the computer sit, all that stuff. And of course, check the lighting, make sure the temperature in the room is comfortable, and, fidgets. Sometimes people like to have fidgets to play with. What are some other things that people have used to keep the board meeting table set in a way that is conducive to good board meetings? What else would you add to this list? Yeah, starting on time. That's a good one. Oh, I like that. It makes people up so they sit in different places. That's a great idea. Yep. Hybrid meetings are definitely a challenge. If you're going to do them, think it through really carefully how it's set up. Yeah, this definitely applies for in-person meetings. Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's a good idea. Sitting new board members with longtime board members as well. Oh, that's good. Yeah. So when you're setting the attention, you could have a brief video or a recap to remind people of the organization's purpose. Right. Thinking about where staff sit. That's an important one too. Yep. Very interesting. Good. All right. I love the collective wisdom here. This is important. That's why we do these. All right. So let's talk about how do we make magic in the boardroom. So what are the things that you've got the perfect meal, or I mean the agenda, and now everybody's gathered. So what are some of the magic making components here? So first, board chairs, really work on your facilitation skills, right? This is going to be important if you're shifting to a meeting style where you're managing a process of decision making. You got to work on your facilitation skills, and if your executive director or CEO can help you with that, it's important. You can look for coaching from other volunteers or leaders in the community. This is going to be really important. Robert's Rules of Order are kind of the gold standard for how meetings should flow. And I've seen a board actually designate a parliamentarian. I don't know if anybody seen that before. So this is a person whose job is to really know Robert's Rules of Order backwards and forwards. And whenever there's a question about procedure, that person is called on to consult the manual. And hopefully it's in their head. But having clarity on process is important. So if you're going to have committee chairs make presentations, think about shifting the idea of them making a report to making a decision-oriented presentation. So we're going to do a case study on that in a moment, but this is where the report, remember I said earlier, sometimes these meetings could have just been a long email. Literally put those into a report that people read in advance, so that when the chairs are asked to make a presentation, that it's decision oriented. This is another thing for the board chair to think about, or anybody who's making a presentation, is don't forget about the quiet people. Don't forget about the people who are on the screen if you're doing a hybrid meeting. Invite them to voice their opinions. I mean, these are folks who are probably a little bit introverted and are sitting back, soaking it up, thinking very deeply, but may just not be ready to speak up unless they're asked to. And you're going to end up with some really important, diverse opinions that way. So what happens if you've got some people who just go on too long, and you got to learn a little phrase like interesting idea. Let's come back to that if we have time, right? Oh, this is a good idea. Having polls ready to go if you're in the Zoom helps the quiet ones. Good. Yep. So here's another thing that I have helped boards deal with in the past, which is folks who are contrarians or argumentative. And yeah, it's important to have contrarians in the room. You need somebody who's going to play devil's advocate sometimes so that you're really sharp making your decisions. Sometimes you've got people who just won't let it go. And how do you deal with difficult personalities like that? So the first thing I'll mention is you preempt it through preparation. So if you know somebody who is going to be a contrarian and that's how they show up, and I've had to deal with this myself, definitely have conversations with that person well in advance of the board meeting. Go through the agenda and the materials in advance. Find out what their issues are. That might actually help sharpen your thinking, or the committee chair or whoever it is that's going to do the presentation before they make that presentation. Right? And that's where you can encourage questions and concerns to get raised before the meeting so that you go in and you can have a really efficient and engaging meeting. There are times where you might have to really establish and put out strong ground rules for behavior in a meeting. And you might have to remind people of the board's code of conduct if one exists. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point. But the chair of the board really does have to be prepared to intervene in certain circumstances where if it gets really bad. So that's, be prepared to redirect gently but firmly so you can keep discussions on track. A line like, thank you for that perspective. Let's return to the issue at hand, or we need to move on to make sure we cover all the agenda items. And the other thing I like to do is find out what their strengths are, right? Find really good outlets for their contrarian views. So it could be that if you're doing strategic planning, you need a devil's advocate. That's a great place. Put them on a committee where they can do that work. I don't want to, really spend much more time on that, but I do want to ask if there are any questions or comments about this this piece of making magic in the boardroom. All right. So we've covered a lot of ground here. And so far, everything that I've presented are things that you could take with you and begin to make some adjustments and changes into your board meetings. For some of you, you might want to think about making some minor changes for incremental growth. Some of you might want to start over from scratch and say, let's just do this whole thing differently. But why don't we take a look at a scenario to see how we can put all of this stuff into practice? So I've come up with this scenario where we have an organization where the facility is in disrepair And I'm really curious to hear if this scenario sounds familiar to anybody. It could be a different type of issue, but here's the basic scenario. Your facility has been struggling with deferred maintenance for years. At every board meeting, there's a report from the facilities committee, and each time they share about a piece of equipment that's broken, a new leak in the roof, a plumbing problem, you name it, but the board never seems to take action. So how could the board be engaged differently to actually take action? So I want to solicit some opinions before we dive into how I would approach that using some of the principles we've just discussed. First of all, has anybody experienced something like this? So why isn't the board taking action? That's the first question I'll put out there. What are some ideas? Why do you think they're not taking action? They don't know what to do. Yeah, it's a good point. They think it's the executive director's job, concerned about lack of resources. Yeah. So let's think also, yeah, nobody's asking them to take action. That's, I mean, sort of fundamentally, right? So how is this affecting the organization's mission, constituents, staff, volunteers? What's the impact of this? Jesse, it's a great question. Is it the board's responsibility to fix pipes? No, but it is. Yeah, we're gonna look at that in a second. Could be demoralized, yeah. Lack of capacity. So there is a paralysis in this board, and this may be familiar to you, and we can fix it with the right setup of meetings. But yes, thanks, Sharon. It is the board's responsibility to protect organizational assets. That's a great response. Thank you for that. So let's think about resetting the table for the board meeting. What are we going to do? So these are the four things basically we've talked about. We talked about the pre-meeting preparation, setting the agenda properly, the communication before the meeting, and the meeting structure itself. These are four really important components that we're going to look at one at a time. So in this particular situation, here's how I would advise this organization to approach this situation. The first is they need to spend some time compiling the data on the deferred maintenance that they have, right? So they need to be aware of what the issue is, the scope of it. I mean, if you're just looking at one thing at a time over years, you don't realize how much deferred maintenance has been backed up. And this is an opportunity to engage volunteers on the board with staff and do a deep dive together. So there's a sense of a common purpose and shared responsibility and accountability. And they can do a financial analysis that looks at, what's the cost of just continuing to repair these things as time goes on versus doing some replacements of major components through a capital campaign. What would it cost to run a capital campaign? Do they know how to do it? So they can draft a preliminary campaign plan and a timeline. They can look at case studies of other nonprofits that have gone through a similar situation. And this could take a while to do. And so this isn't the kind of thing you put on the agenda and think about the day before. This could take weeks, if not months. So all of that's pulled together. And so we're going to put this on the meeting agenda. So this is probably going to be a really significant decision that this board is going to have to make. And so they want to allocate substantial time to it. It could be 30 minutes, it could be up to an hour, depending on how big a deal is. And again, it's about framing the agenda item as a strategic decision rather than a routine update. That is a massive change for some people to be able to think in terms of committee reports versus decision-making presentations. And so when the communication goes out to the board, there needs to be a briefing document that clearly spells out what the issue is. It has all of the information that's been gathered. And again, this is something that staff and board leadership can work on together in partnership. And there should be thought-provoking questions that board members should be thinking about and considering before the meeting, so they can walk into the meeting with some opinions and receptivity to listening to other people thinking about this same issue. So those are the first three, and then let's take a look at the actual meeting structure itself. So what do we want to have a meeting look like when we're dealing with this type of thing? So first step is that the board chair will frame the issue as a strategic decision and is going to invite discussion and encourage it. So if there's a facilities committee chair, that person would then be invited to lay out the issue, and they should do it concisely, right? Because there has to be the expectation that everybody's read the materials in advance, but this is an opportunity to summarize and then address the impact of the problem on the mission. So really coming back to, this is why it's a problem, this is how it's affecting our constituents, our staff, and ultimately our mission. And then this is where they get to talk about some options of how to address it, and then they can present some pros and cons. If we do a capital campaign, it's going to cost us this, we may not have the capacity to do it, et cetera, et cetera. And then this is where you start with a facilitated discussion that's got structure to it, right? And this is, again, where whoever is facilitating this part of the meeting has to have really good facilitation skills. And make sure the discussion has some specific questions that are guiding the overall discussion. Let's see if there, oh no, I thought a question popped up. And then lastly, you engage in the decision-making process with follow-up action steps, right? So one of the worst things you can do is have a meeting like this, make a decision, and then not actually take the action steps that the board has agreed upon. So a question that you want to think about with your decision-making process is, do you want to have the outcome be consensus or a majority? Some decisions, it's a good idea to get full board consensus, and some, if you have one person who votes no, that may be okay. But following up from the board's decision is really important, and having a meeting summary sent out afterwards, not just the official minutes, but a recap of what we decided and what management is going to do about it is really important. So during the meeting, here's what the board chair should be thinking about. Number one, make sure all voices are heard. We talked about that before. Bring in the unpopular opinions and let those people, state what they need to state. Again, keeping the discussion focused on the strategic implications. And it's always important to encourage that all of the decision-making is going to be data-driven and values-driven. So who are we as an organization to allow this facility to go into such disrepair, right? And how much is it going to cost? What actually is, at stake here? So data-driven and values-driven decision-making is really important. And maintaining that forward-looking, solution-oriented perspective, right? Not harping on failures of the past. Maybe there was a previous CEO who just sort of let things go. Maybe it was, people who want to look for blame, what happened before, not worth it. Forward-looking, solution-oriented. And I already talked about consensus. Moving towards consensus is usually a good goal. so that the resolution is actionable, then everybody really feels like they have a part in it and that there's a sense of accountability. And so you're going to see the results. You're going to see the results happening real quickly. But actually, before I want to move on to this one, I want to ask if you can share with me a few takeaways that are one or two things that are really important for you that have emerged from this presentation so far. Structure is important. Yeah. The dinner. Yep. Yeah. Value of preparation. Totally underrated, isn't it? Yep. The role of board chair, very good. Purpose. Yep. Yeah. Preparing the meeting. Yeah. It's a good reminder to put on your calendar. If you've got a board meeting in 3 weeks before the board meeting, put on your calendar steps of what you need to take. And then, given all of this stuff that we just talked about, is there anything else in this case study that you would have wanted to do or think about in terms of making this meeting work better? Can you think of a particular issue that might be coming up, or an issue that has been left unaddressed that you want to start focusing on for your one of your upcoming meetings? I find a lot of times there's a fear of bringing up big meaty issues to the board because you can't predict what's going to happen. Has anybody had that fear going into wanting to basically avoid decision making at the board level? The meeting before the meeting is important. Yep. Yep. You're struggling a bit with accountability. So that's interesting, Jess. I know it's Jesse. Yeah. In terms of accountability, I don't know if you're willing to come off mute and say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So I was just thinking, thanks for, I have to hop off here in a sec because
That's fine, yeah.
But for example, we have a task force to put together a board manual, and the members haven't picked it up in like 3 months. So they just, oh, something came up. So just keeping members accountable and what to do if
Yeah, so accountability, that's a great case to mention, Jesse. Thank you. Accountability is going to come from people having the emotional attachment to the issue. So do they feel a real strong drive to want to solve a problem? How is that going to get them animated and there's a word I'm looking for. How's it going to get them really driven to want to take action intrinsically? And it's not necessarily because you're asking them to, it's because they see that there's a greater purpose. There might need to be somebody else who's going to help add their voice to reinforce that message. And a lot of times it comes down to storytelling. Board manuals are kind of boring. So you have to figure out something that makes it exciting and enticing. And then from there, you get some accountability. All right, let me just look a couple more things. Sunsetting an impactful but costly initiative. Yeah, that's a really tough one. Really tough one. And on that, I think you're looking at recognizing when it's the right time to take a risk to bring it up to the board. And hopefully a lot of these ideas about how do you set up the meeting itself will make it less fearful for you to actually take that step. It sounds like some people have to log off, but what I'm going to do is just mention a few things about what the results that you can anticipate from doing this really important work. You will start to see people showing up to board meetings who used to be absent. You're going to start to see a lot more engagement, a lot of people who are not dropping off the board. Your reputation will improve. People might start asking if they can join your board because they've heard such good things. Important decisions are getting made that staff rely on to do their jobs well. And there's really good oversight. There's good governance. The board and the staff are working better than ever, and they have good relationships with each other because there's this good sense of mutual accountability. And there's clear organizational direction. We know what we're doing. We know why we're doing it. And we'll start to see more innovative thinking, be able to uncover these really hidden opportunities. And just remember, you don't have to make wholesale changes all at once. You can make, little changes, take an incremental approach. And if you don't have consent agendas, maybe that's where you start. And if you aren't using a 3-week lead time to plan for meetings, maybe give that a shot. So I really want to thank everybody for being a part of this workshop today and contributing your ideas as well. I would love to have you connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like. That's the QR code where you can do that. You can find me at linkedin.com/in/Ratkin. And then lastly, I'd love to get your feedback. You can use that QR code, fill out a really short form, and it just helps us understand better the kinds of things that you are looking for, and helps me improve these presentations in the future as well. And I appreciate it very much. And so I'll just stay, active here, and I won't leave until Sharon tells me to, kick me off. But if anybody has some specific questions they want to run through with me, I'm happy to do that.
Excellent. Yes, I had a question for you, Michael.
Yeah.
I'm curious, for board, I mean, I know you've gone through just sort of the structure and format for board meetings. Do you think it's inappropriate to ask, because I've been invited on boards and participated and now I have my own board. Do you think it's acceptable to ask board members and advisory board members to contribute financially to be on a board?
Yeah, I recommend, whenever I have this question posed to me, I always recommend that there be a policy in writing, if not verbally, excuse me. When you are serving on a board of directors, that organization should be one of your top 3 philanthropic priorities. So a lot of times people ask me, should we set a board gift minimum? Well, that might work in some cases, but in other cases it won't. So for example, if an organization that I work with all the time, Hillel, sometimes we have philanthropists who can make gifts of $10, $20, $30, $50,000, but we also have student board members who can afford maybe an $10 gift. So I think it's better to say, make this one of your top 3 philanthropic priorities.
Okay.
But not to give a specific minimum.
And how should that be said? When you say that's in writing, is that prior to them being on the board, or
Yeah, I wouldn't invite somebody to serve on the board unless I've been clear with them what the expectations are. And it's usually a good idea to have a set of written expectations, not only what the organization expects of board members, but also what a board member can expect from the organization. So let it go 2 ways.
Because I get that all the time, actually. That's like the first question that people ask me is like, what are my expectations? Do you have something as a guideline of those expectations?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because I'm very sort of
Yeah, I'm sure Sharon has some examples. I certainly have seen a bunch of examples. By the way, there's a great resource out there called BoardSource. If you go to boardsource.org, you can probably search up there or something, but I'm sure Sharon's got some good examples too.
Yeah, I can include a couple of templates with the notes, with the follow-up note that we'll send. But a
Okay,
lot of the time it's, I think, something I heard that was really good was please give, if you don't want to set an amount, please give an amount that's meaningful to you is
that's
kind of,
good. I mean, I was also thinking too, like I have my board of directors, which is, 5 people, and then I have an advisory board. And do I make that like a minimum of like $500, or just a baseline? The second question I have for you, Michael, is as it relates to board of directors, advisories, do you set a term for those particular members? Is it a year? Is it 2 years? I'd love to get your thoughts on
Great.
that.
Yeah, really great question. I've been working with boards on that very question. There are boards who've had board members serving for 15, 20 years. And it's really healthy for an organization to have some turnover in the board
Yes,
so that you get
yeah.
diversity of perspectives. It's not easy to do. So term limits are, can kind of be contentious sometimes when you have board members who've been serving for that long. So
Or board members that pay a significant amount of money that
yeah,
feel,
so
they're
here's
paying for their, their right to contribute. So is,
correct.
what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'll take this question and we'll see if there are any other questions after this. But I'd like to recommend the first step is to establish something like an emeritus advisory board. Create a place where these longstanding board members who are probably major donors can get the respect that they deserve, have a venue where their voices can be heard, but they aren't part of the governance structure. So if you have a non-governance advisory committee or advisory board, give it a nice title. Make sure you meet a couple times a year, could be quarterly. Bring a meaty issue for them to think about and give you advice on, the board chair and the CEO together. And that gives them an opportunity, it gives them a venue to be participants without, but also make room for new people to be part of the governance of the organization. Greg, thanks for those awesome questions. Anybody else have other issues or questions they want to discuss?
I mean, I have one more if you got time.
Yeah, good. Sharon, you have to remind me how much time we have, so I don't know.
yeah, we actually have till 11:30, but I
Oh, that's what
know,
I thought. I wanted to make sure. I saw some
yeah,
folks
I know
jumping off, so I
sometimes with
wasn't
the
sure.
hour,
Yeah.
that
I
folks have other.
apologize for being late.
No,
No, no,
no,
you're
you're
good. Go
great.
ahead.
There was a glitch on the registration and I need to make a payment to you. When I registered, it didn't show up. But so it's weird. So Paige sent me the link, but I need to do that follow up. I just want to make sure
All
that.
good.
Oh, don't worry about it. Yeah.
We'll
No, but I
figure
think
it
it's
out.
important.
So
because I really-
what's your other question, Greg?
Yeah, my other question, which is probably a little bit more a practical question, as it relates to the creation of your board of directors. Obviously, there's a lot of people I see, they put together a board of directors, based on people's resumes and industry, et cetera, et cetera. Is there, and for us, we're sort of we live in two worlds. We live in a marine science, ocean water conservation world. And then we also live in a film industry world, which are completely two different sets of people and
Cool.
have two different types of proteges. And then in the middle, we have certain, philanthropists who like to be both. And I'm just curious, when you're looking at a board, because we're a very
Mhm.
young organization, I feel like I need to put a little bit more time and detail. One, are there any books that you recommend in terms of the construction of building a successful board?
There's a good introductory text that you can get that
Okay. I'm gonna buy it tomorrow. Okay, got it.
Okay, that's a great one. And then I don't know how, this is probably pretty old, but they may have, yeah, it's gotta be. The Board Cafe has a bunch of books that may still be in
Excellent.
print, I'm not sure, but if you go
I'll
to
find it.
BoardSource, you're gonna
I'll find
find some great other, newer, refreshed resources out there.
Okay. Yeah, and then my question, beside the resources, I mean, like when you go and select a board, are you basing it on name value, financial
Yeah.
value? Like, what are the top priorities that you're looking at when you're building out your board and your other, and an advisory board, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, so it's a number of things. You want to, first of all, you want to make sure you have people who are passionately committed to the mission. And
Correct.
that's got to be a prerequisite for any board member.
I have too many of those, yes.
And then you want to make sure you've got people who are what I like to call well-resourced and well-connected, right? So people who are going to be able to make significant financial contributions of time, wisdom, but also are well-connected and are going to be helpful to you in achieving your goals with respect to capacity building. So I'm assuming that you're an organization that wants to grow and build capacity to do more with the organization's resources. And so that means you have to raise more money. And if you're going to want to raise more money, you have to, connect with people who, for whom the mission is going to be resonant and will have the capacity to support you financially. So having board members as ambassadors who are well networked in those various communities, whether it's film or marine or whatever it is, it could be just lay people who really think that what you're doing is awesome. And so looking at your board as those ambassadors is one thing. I also like to look at the skill sets of who do you have on your board. So for example, fiduciary oversight is a really important area for a board to be masterful at. Do you have a CPA?
I
Legal
do.
question.
I
Legal
do.
questions come up.
I've had a couple of lawyers that do have a CPA.
Yeah, so these are the types of
board,
things
and
that
I've been
you
actually
think about.
And I've been looking at, how important, because as we're growing, we have even more legal issues as we get bigger and more prolific.
Sure.
Again, we're very small. I'm finding, the greater need for lawyers and finding good lawyers, and that was I could ask a lot more questions, but is there another way? I mean, because traditionally I know where to find entertainment lawyers or finance lawyers. Where do you find good? I mean, obviously, I love LifeChat, and through the Hive, I've been able to curate and get a recommendation for a nonprofit lawyer, which was great. But is there a place where these people live and exist? And do you know that?
It's going to come from networking, and I think a lot of times, Cal nonprofits is a good idea, but I think a lot of times this is where I like to do some friend-raising events, right? So you've heard of fundraising events.
Yes.
Sometimes you can just have an event where you're inviting people just to get to know your organization. You're not asking them for money. You're just introducing them to it. You're going to do some networking. You're going to find people there who are going to, pique your interest, and you're going to pique their interest. And it becomes a bit of a matchmaking. And you start to develop those relationships over time, and you see if somebody is a good fit for your board. So wait, let me just take a quick look at these other questions on the side here. I got a question from Russell about give or get. How appropriate is it to ask board members to help in the fundraising, asking their peers, coworkers to contribute? So I happen to believe that that should be an essential feature of a board. Boards today are less and less fundraising oriented as fundraising has become much more professionalized. But it's also a really great skill for them to have in their lives. And there's a great book that I've lost. Where is it? Oh, here it is. That can actually, you can read this over the weekend. It's called The Ask, and it's by Laura Fredericks. And the reason that this is a great book is it teaches you the art of asking people for something. And it's not just about asking people for money. It's about asking people. It could be asking for a raise at your job. It could be anything. It could be a kid asking for allowance from their parents. But a lot of times board members are reluctant to do it because they don't know how to do it. They're uncomfortable with it, and giving them the confidence to give people the opportunity to do good for the world. And board members, a lot of them may not be willing to ask people for money, but they may be willing to ask people to learn about the organization, to invite their friends to a fundraising event, to help with the cultivation of a gift, to help with stewardship after a gift has been made. So there's a lot of opportunities to participate in fundraising, and the board should work towards getting there. So Daniel has a question. Love to hear more about the ideal board and committee size, how this may be related to the size, other specific contextual realities of a given organization, and also what kind of absenteeism is acceptable in your eyes. Okay, so the ideal board size, it's interesting. I think it's evolved over time. 20-something years ago, 30 years ago, there was a board that I was a part of an organization where there were 40 people on the board. That's a lot. It's really hard to get business done. And I think that's why the executive committee was making the decisions and just having them rubber stamped by the board. So I love seeing boards that are around the 12 to 15 number. I think that's much more manageable. So Sharon, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as well. You like that? And then for committees, it really depends on what kind of work they have to get done. You can have a committee of 3 and it's fine. But again, it just really depends on the work of the committee itself. And for a gala committee, for example, if you have a big fundraising event, you might need 5, 10, 15 people. I mean, it depends how extensive it is. And the last question there is, what kind of absenteeism is acceptable in your eyes? I don't like seeing any absenteeism at all. I like people showing up because that means there's a real sense of accountability and commitment to the mission. It also means that the organization is doing its job of making it accessible and compelling for board members to be present. So, if you're having monthly board meetings, for example, and you're starting to see a lot of people saying, I can't make it, I'm sorry, maybe you have to adjust and say, let's just only have board meetings every other month. What do we need them for, right? So, and if it's absenteeism, and also you have to look at your bylaws to see if there's a certain provision there for people missing meetings.
Michael, I just
So
want
who is the
about
author? Oh,
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
I'm not sure if you answered the question for the actual term of the board or the advisory board. Is it 2 years? Is it 1 year?
Oh, the term.
What is actually, what is,
it's gonna depend on what you want for the board. There is no real rule for that. The standard that I typically see is that people serve for terms of 2 years, and then a term limit might be 3 terms, so a total of 6 years. It's pretty common. Officers, I like to see them serving as an officer for 1 year, but can be renewable. Board chairs, I'd like to see serving as the term of 2 years, but no more than 2 terms. So it depends. The author of the ask is Laura Fredericks. It's a great book, really easy read. Oh, Sharon, you already wrote that. Sorry. Okay. All right. Any other questions from other folks to bring up here? And you feel free to unmute if you'd like. Sharon, do you have any questions?
No, I think this is great. I put in the chat too, though. I've been writing down the resources that Michael has shared, and I'll share those out with the notes. I spelled Laura Fredericks' last name wrong, but I'll get you the Amazon link and we'll do that. And I'll do the others, the nonprofit board answer book and board cafe and that stuff.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, Michael, I just want to thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise. It's been a great conversation and really, really good. Yeah, if we have any other questions, we can do that. Otherwise, we'll, as I said, we'll send the link, we'll send the resources, we'll send the PowerPoint. I mean, Michael also gave you the link to his LinkedIn, and in case he can be of help through, some of his services. But that's it, I guess. So.
Yeah, that's it. And it's just one quick reminder, if you don't mind, to fill out this quick evaluation, feedback form. It'll help a lot. And it's also an opportunity, if you want, you can share your name and email address, and I'll send you some additional resources as well.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for being with us. And we will have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Take care. The length of board training. Often, like at least 90 minutes is sort of the rule of thumb that I had seen somewhere. And to have, and I think Michael touched on it, of course, is a binder, and make sure people have some time to read it and hear presentations from colleagues in case people don't read. So.
Yeah, but Jessica, it's a great question. I do like a 90-minute meeting, because you can build in 15 minutes for socializing up front, and get the meat of the meeting done probably within an hour. But again, if you're going to deal with some pretty significant challenges, you might need to look at 2 hours. And also, it depends on how frequently you're meeting throughout the year. And also is kind of what's your board constituency like? Do they are they going to meet for lunch? Are they going to meet in the evening? How about frequency? You do monthly for 2 hours? Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, if you see a lot of, this is an opportunity to survey your board and ask them, what do they think? You can do an informal survey just by talking to a few people. You can do an actual survey. Monthly for me feels like a lot because, like I said, meetings are 3 weeks long, which means you've just had a meeting, and the next week you have to start planning the next one. And that just feels like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
If you could get away with 4 times a year, great. Otherwise, go for 6. By the way, you can always call a special meeting if there's something that comes up. Look at your bylaws and see if what kind of notice you have to give. Sometimes the bylaws will say you need to give at least 4 days notice for a special meeting. So yeah, I agree with you. Monthly does feel like a lot to me. Yep. You are welcome. It's been a pleasure. Yeah, and then for executive committee, this is a kind of thing where it can be as needed. It doesn't even have to be a fixed schedule. You could say we're going to have 4 per year. And again, using them as an advisory group more than a decision-making group is really helpful. Just to say what should be on the agenda for the board meetings is a good use of the executive committee's time. Cool. This has been fun. Really great questions.
Great.
Really great insights from everybody. Sharon, thank you again for the opportunity.
No, thank you. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good day.
Have a great one.
See you later. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Michael, I actually already have the PDF of your presentation.
Oh, you do?
I
You know
made
what? I may have made a couple of edits, so I might redo it for you.
Okay. Just wanted to save you the time. Okay. Thanks so
Awesome.
much. See you later.
Thanks. All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.